Don't let her near him. He will put her on the ground. Those were the first words Sergeant First Class Damon Holt said when he walked through the door of Ridgeline Animal Care Center on a Tuesday morning in November, dragging behind him 87 pounds of pure German Schätzhüsnel named Aries. Petra Vance heard him from across the front desk. She was in the middle of logging a vaccine record, coffee still steaming beside her keyboard, and she looked up the way you look up when someone fires a gun in a quiet room. Not because she was scared, because something in his voice was trying very hard to sound like it wasn't. She'd been a veterinary nurse for 6 years. She'd worked emergency shifts at 2 different clinics before landing at Ridgeline. She had been bitten 3 times, knocked flat twice, and had a scar on her left forearm from a rescue Malinois that still pulled tight when the weather changed. She knew what a dangerous dog looked like when it walked into a room. She also knew what a man looked like when he was using his dog as a wall between himself and everything else. Holt was tall, somewhere past 40, with the kind of posture that didn't come from good habits. It came from years of someone yelling at you until it became permanent. He wore a gray army t-shirt despite the cold, faded cargo pants and boots that had seen actual dirt. His jaw was set like he'd decided beforehand how this appointment was going to go, and he wasn't going to negotiate. Aries moved differently. The dog was magnificent and broken in equal measure. His coat was still glossy, still dense. This was not a neglected animal, but the way he held himself was wrong. His shoulders were too high. His eyes swept the room with a kind of calculation that wasn't aggression. Not exactly. It was assessment. It was the look of something that had learned the world was full of things that could hurt you and had decided to get to them first. Dr. Hendricks, Ridgeline's senior vet, came out from the back hallway and immediately pulled up short. He was a good doctor, steady and careful, but he was also 62 years old, and he'd learned which hills weren't worth dying on. He looked at Aries, he looked at Holt, he looked at Petra. Petra set down her pen. "We got this," she said, more to Hendricks than to the sergeant. Then she came around the front desk and walked toward the waiting area where Holt was standing with Aries braced at his left side. "Ma'am." Holt's voice was not unkind, but it had the quality of a road with no shoulder. "I appreciate it, but you need to stay back. He doesn't do well with strangers. Especially," a pause, short but visible, "women." Petra stopped about 5 feet away. She didn't cross her arms. She didn't smile the way people smile when they're nervous and trying not to show it. She just looked at the dog. Aries looked back. "What happened to him?" she asked. "He was a working dog," Holt said. 7 years with the 75th. He retired 8 months ago. The sergeant stopped, recalibrated. "He's been having a hard time adjusting." "That's not what I asked," Petra said. The room went quiet. The receptionist at the front desk, a young woman named Trish, who'd been with Ridgeline for 7 months, stopped typing. The man with the beagle in the corner chair looked up from his phone. Holt looked at Petra like she'd just said something in a language he didn't know existed. "He had a handler before me," Holt said finally. "A woman. She was killed in action 14 months ago. Aries was there. He doesn't trust." He stopped again, pressed his lips together. "He's not safe. I'm telling you that for your own good, not because I think you can't handle yourself. He has sent 2 people to the ER in the last 6 months. Both of them were trying to help him." Petra nodded slowly. She let a few seconds pass. Then she sat down on the floor. Not crouched, not kneeling. All the way down, cross-legged, right there on the linoleum of the waiting room, as if this were the most natural thing she'd done all morning. Holt stared at her. "What are you doing?" he said. "Waiting," she said. "Ma'am, Petra," she said. "And I heard you. I'm not ignoring what you told me. I'm taking it seriously." She kept her eyes soft, slightly averted from Aries, not looking at him directly, not challenging him, just existing at his level. "But you brought him here for a reason. He's in pain, so I'm going to wait until he decides he wants to tell me where." Holt's grip tightened on the leash. She could see it from where she sat, the knuckles whitening, the slight flex of his forearm. He was a man who'd spent his career controlling outcomes, and she had just taken herself entirely out of his control. Aries watched her. He didn't lunge, he didn't bark. He lowered his head by a fraction of an inch and watched her the way a dog watches something it doesn't have a category for yet. "He has a lesion on his left rear hip," Holt said abruptly. "Appeared about 3 weeks ago. He won't let anyone near it. I've tried. The other clinic tried. They had to sedate him just to get a look, and he was disoriented for 2 days after, and I'm not. His voice cracked very slightly on the word I'm. He smoothed it out quickly. I don't want to do that to him again. How's his appetite? Down. Sleep? Restless. He used to sleep through anything. Something shifted in Holt's face. Not softness, not yet, but a loosening, the way a fist opens, not because you decided to open it, but because you got tired. He used to sleep curled up against the wall and you could drop a plate in the kitchen and he wouldn't even lift his head. Now he's up every hour, pacing. Petra was quiet for a moment. What was her name? She asked. The question landed in the room like a stone in still water. Holt said nothing for a long time. Aries had taken one step forward, just one. His nose was working in Petra's direction, slow and deliberate. Sergeant First Class Alicia Drummond, Holt said. His voice was flat and careful, the way you carry something that's full of something else. She'd had him for 4 years. Since he was 18 months old, did she name him? She named him after the Greek god of war, Holt said, and there was something in the way he said it that wasn't quite irony and wasn't quite grief, but lived somewhere between the two. She thought it was funny because he was terrified of thunder. Petra smiled, very quietly, at the floor. Aries took another step. Holt's hand came up, pure reflex, and then he stopped himself, held still, watched. The dog was now 3 feet from the woman sitting on his linoleum floor. His tail was not wagging, his body was not relaxed. But he was approaching, and that alone was something Holt hadn't seen in months, and something in the sergeant's chest was doing something he didn't have a name for and didn't want to examine too closely. He's going to smell you, Holt said, a warning still, old habit. I know, Petra said. That's fine. Aries reached her. He pressed his nose to her hand, her wrist, her forearm, methodical, the way he'd been trained to clear a space, the way Drummond had taught him that the smell of a place tells you whether it's safe. He worked his way up to her shoulder, and then he stopped, and he stood there, and Petra did not move. Then Aries put his head on her shoulder. It was not a lean. It was not a nudge. It was a deliberate, exhausted placement, the gesture of a creature who had been holding himself up against the world for 14 months and had suddenly decided to rest. Holt made a sound. He tried to turn it into a cough and didn't entirely succeed. Okay, Petra said quietly. To the dog, not to the man. Okay, I've got you. She brought her hand up very slowly and laid it along the side of Aries's face. He didn't flinch. His eyes were half closed. She looked up at Holt then, and his face was doing something he clearly hadn't meant to let it do. He was looking at his dog who had put 2 people in the hospital, who had not let anyone touch him without a fight in over a year, resting against a stranger on a waiting room floor. And the look on his face was not embarrassment. It was relief. And beneath the relief, something that hurt. Let me take a look at him, Petra said. Just me, in the back. You can watch through the window if you want. He won't. Holt started. I know, she said, but I think he will now. She was right. In the examination room, Aries stood still while Petra ran her hands along his back, his ribs, his haunches. She spoke to him the whole time. Not commands, not coaxing baby talk, just a low, even stream of language, the way you talk to someone who doesn't speak your language but needs to know you're not a threat. She found the lesion easily. It was larger than she'd expected and angrier, the skin around it hot and taut. Holt watched through the glass panel in the door, arms crossed, jaw tight. She could feel his eyes. She worked around the lesion gently, pressing with 2 fingers to map the edges. Aries turned his head to look at her once, not a warning, just a look, and she paused and let him breathe for a moment before she continued. He's going to need a biopsy, she said, loud enough to carry. The tissue presentation is irregular. I want Hendricks to take a sample today, but I want to sedate him differently than they did before. Something gentler, shorter acting. I'll stay with him the whole time. Why does it matter if you stay with him? Holt said through the glass. She looked up. Because he'll smell me when he comes back. It'll help orient him. Coming out of sedation in an unfamiliar place with unfamiliar smells on top of what he's already carrying, that's a rough re-entry. Holt was quiet for a moment. You've done this before. I've sat on a lot of floors, she said. His mouth did something that might, in better circumstances, have become a smile. The biopsy took 40 minutes. Aries woke slowly, lifting his head with the confused dignity of an animal trying to remember how it got here, and the first thing he did when his vision cleared was find Petra's hand. She was sitting at the edge of the exam table, her palm resting within his reach, and he pressed his nose against it and exhaled. Hendricks came back with the preliminary read 45 minutes later. The expression on his face when he pulled Petra aside was careful in the particular way of doctors who have learned to deliver bad news without flinching. "Grade 2 mast cell tumor," he said quietly. "We got a good margin. I think we caught it." Petra breathed out. "I'll talk to the sergeant," Hendricks said. "I'll do it," Petra said. He looked at her. "You sure?" "Yeah," she said. "I'm sure." Holt was in the waiting room when she came out. He stood up the moment he saw her face, and she watched him brace himself. Watched the way he absorbed whatever he was expecting without letting it show. The way you learn to take hits when you've been taking them long enough. "He has a mast cell tumor," she said. "Grade 2. Dr. Hendricks believes he got clean margins, which means there's real reason for hope. But I want to be straight with you about what that means and what comes next." Holt sat back down. She sat down across from him, not behind the desk, not in the staff chair, but in the seat beside him, the way you sit with someone, not in front of them. She told him everything. The biopsy results, the staging, the follow-up imaging, the treatment options. She didn't soften it, and she didn't amplify it. She gave him the information the way he gave her the warning about Aries, straight and complete, because she could see he was the kind of man who needed the truth more than he needed comfort. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he sat for a moment with his hands on his knees. "What would you do?" he asked. "I'd fight for him," she said, "but I'd also make sure every day between now and whatever happens next counts. That means walks. That means letting him sleep against you, even when it's inconvenient. That means not treating him like he's fragile, because he's not fragile. He's grieving and he's sick, and there is a real difference." Holt looked at her. "Grieving. Yes," she said. "Dogs grieve. They don't have the language for it, so it comes out in behavior. The aggression, the sleeplessness, the appetite. Those aren't just symptoms of the tumor. He lost someone who was his entire world and nobody told him why. He's been waiting for her to come back for over a year." The muscle in Holt's jaw moved. "When I first got him," Holt said slowly, "after she died, I didn't want him. I'll say that out loud. I didn't want a dog. I wasn't going to keep him. I was going to let the program find him a placement. But nobody else could get near him, and they were talking about." He stopped. "They were talking about other options. So I took him." "You saved him," Petra said. "I don't know that I've done him any favors," Holt said. "The way he's been, he's alive," she said, "and he sat down with you right next to him and let me touch him today. That's not nothing. That's months of you showing up even when it was hard and he didn't want you there." She paused. "He knows. He just doesn't know how to say it yet." Holt looked down at his hands. They were large hands, scarred across the knuckles, the kind of hands that had done things that didn't have civilian equivalents. They were, right now, not entirely steady. "He chose you," Holt said. "Back there in the waiting room, just like that." "He needed someone to sit still long enough," Petra said. "Most people don't." She saw Aries twice more before the follow-up imaging was scheduled. The second time, Holt arrived 15 minutes early and sat in the parking lot. She saw him through the front window when she was pulling a file, just sitting in his truck with the dog in the back seat, not coming in, not leaving, just sitting. She didn't go out. She gave him the time. When he finally came through the door, Aries went straight to her. Not past her, not around her, to her. Holt watched this happen with an expression that was becoming familiar to Petra, the look of a man slowly finding out that his understanding of something was incomplete and adjusting without being entirely sure he liked the process. "He slept," Holt said by way of greeting. "All night? 6 hours straight." Something that was unmistakably relief moved across his face. First time in months. Petra crouched down and let Aries smell her hands. "Good boy," she said, and meant it in the full, complicated way. "Good boy for sleeping, good boy for trusting, good boy for still being here." "I owe you an apology," Holt said. She looked up. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at a spot on the wall somewhere past her shoulder, the way people look when they're saying something it costs them something to say. "For what?" she asked. "When I came in the first time, I implied, that you couldn't handle yourself, or that you didn't know what you were doing." He paused. "I was wrong about that." "You weren't trying to be condescending," she said. "You were trying to protect him, and probably yourself." He looked at her then, and the look was direct and a little unguarded, the way a person looks when you've named something they hadn't said. "Both," he said, "probably both." The follow-up imaging came back 3 weeks later. Clean. No spread, no secondary sites. Hendricks called it cautiously excellent and recommended a 3-month monitoring schedule. Holt brought Aries in for the results on a Friday afternoon, late, when the clinic was winding down for the evening and Trish was already pulling on her coat. Hendricks delivered the news and then retreated to his paperwork, the way good doctors do when they understand that the room doesn't need them anymore. Petra found Holt standing in the hallway, Aries leaning against his leg. The dog's tail was moving, slow, low, the kind of wag that wasn't about excitement. It was about ease. Holt had one hand resting on the top of Aries' head without thinking about it, the automatic gesture of a man who had, somewhere between November and now, stopped treating affection like a thing he had to justify. Good news, Petra said, because she wanted to hear him hear it again. Yeah, he said. He exhaled, slow, the kind of exhale that carries a long time with it. Yeah, it is. She leaned against the wall across from him. Outside, the parking lot lights had come on, and the November dark was pressing against the windows. The clinic smelled like antiseptic and the particular clean warmth of animal hair, and somewhere in the back, Hendricks' radio was playing something she couldn't identify. What made you become a vet nurse? Holt asked. He said it like it was a question he'd been holding for a while. I kept bringing home strays, she said. My mother said if I was going to insist on saving every broken thing I found, I might as well learn how. Something happened in his eyes. She sounds practical, he said. She was. She died when I was 24. Petra looked at her hands. I kept doing it anyway. Holt was quiet for a moment. What's the hardest part? He asked. Letting them go when the time comes, she said, and knowing when the time comes. Those are both hard, and sometimes the second one is harder. He nodded. Aries looked up at him, and then at Petra, and then back at him, the calm triangle of attention that dogs make when they've decided everyone in the room belongs together. He's going to be okay, Petra said. I can't promise you forever, but today he's okay. Today, Holt said. He said it like he was learning a different relationship with the word. Okay. The last time she saw them that year was a Saturday in December, not an appointment. She was coming out of the supply room with a box of gauze when she heard Trish say, "She's actually here, hold on," and then looked up to find Holt standing at the front desk with Aries and incongruously a small paper bag with handles. We were in the neighborhood, he said. Then, that's not true. We drove 40 minutes. Petra set down the gauze. Aries came to her immediately, tail moving in that same low, easy rhythm, and she put both hands on his face and looked at him, at the brightness that had come back into his eyes, at the way he held his body now, lower at the shoulders, looser, present. He's doing well, she said. He is, Holt said. We both are. He said it like it still surprised him a little. He held out the bag. It's not much. Trish mentioned you like those cookies from the bakery on Caldwell Street. The ones with the orange peel. She did she? Petra said, and looked at Trish, who was studying her computer screen with great intensity. I also wanted to say, Holt started, and then seemed to have to find a different approach. I spent most of the last year being angry at everything that wasn't Alicia coming back. Aries was part of that. The doctors who couldn't fix him were part of that. The clinic that had to sedate him. All of it. He looked at her steadily. You were the first person who didn't try to fix him on the first day. You just sat with him. Sometimes that's all it takes, she said. I know that now, he said. I didn't know it before. Aries looked up at her. His eyes were warm and clear, and he pressed the top of his head very gently against her palm, the way dogs do when they want you to know you are good. When they want you to know you are someone they have chosen. Outside, December light was thin and cold against the clinic windows. Inside, it was warm enough. Petra stood in the hallway of the place she'd worked for 6 years, with a paper bag in one hand and a large German shepherd's face in the other. And she thought about her mother, who had told her that saving broken things was a reasonable life's work, and she thought about Drummond, Sergeant First Class Alicia Drummond, who had named a war dog after the god of war because he was afraid of thunder, and she had thought that was funny, and she thought about how many things in this world were exactly like that, carrying a fierce name and a secret tenderness, trying to protect themselves against losses they didn't have words for. She thought Drummond would have liked Aries's new apartment, his new routine, his new person who drove 40 minutes on a Saturday to bring cookies to the woman who'd sat down on the floor. She thought Drummond would have understood. Aries leaned into her hand, and somewhere, in whatever language dogs use to mark the people who matter, he made her permanent.